Welcome, everyone, to the Not-for-Profit of Tomorrow conference. I'm Kelly Hagan, and I will be your moderator for today. It's amazing to see so many attendees as we look forward to spending the next couple of hours with you. I've got to be honest, it's a little strange doing a presentation to a group this large virtually. It may look like I'm speaking to you, but I'm actually speaking to my dog. And I'm praying also that there's not an Amazon package that gets delivered during my speech. This is something that we all are dealing with working from home, and the struggle is real. It's been quite a year for us, 2020, with all that we've had to deal with in the pandemic, and it certainly had an impact on all different industries. But I think the not-for-profit sector has been hit pretty hard. We've had to navigate, operating with decreased funding. We've had to deal with new regulations. We've had to deal with operational changes, and not to mention that we're still trying to figure out the government relief strategies. The good news is we've made it this far, and we should all commend ourselves for getting this far. We've evolved and changed and probably surprised ourselves a little bit on the possibilities of what we could accomplish in a short period of time. Working from home has been adopted, and for the most part, it's working pretty well. We are still getting used to trying to figure out how to put our cameras at the right angle for our Zoom meetings, but we are here and we are communicating, and we figured out that we can do it without state-of-the-art technology, when really a little modernization, some changes to the way we used to do things is all that was needed. So while we're here, let's talk a little bit about what does the not-for-profit of tomorrow look like? Well, we know the digital transformation is certainly going to be part of it. We have to evolve into continuing remote access, as we know that even as offices start to open again and we get beyond the pandemic, we are probably going to continue to operate in a different capacity than what we have been. We're going to still have remote access. We'll have people working in more flexible schedules and trying to operate in that way to continue to do their jobs more efficiently. We may find that not only remote access, but things like contactless payments and communications to meet our society's immediate reaction needs is going to grow. People are impatient. They're used to getting information at their fingertips. And even in the not-for-profit sector, we have to evolve and make sure that we're competitive in that space. It may sound funny to call it competition, but we are still competing for time and space in people's lives. And we want to make sure that when they read or hear about our cause, that they're willing to make an immediate reaction and donate or provide support to the mission that we're supporting. This is really important for the growth of the not-for-profit sector as we move forward into the new realities that we'll be dealing with. We also want to think about how some of this change may actually be a benefit to our industry, right? Imagine if our remote connections actually give us the ability to help further reach more people. Maybe we can grow our missions by serving people through the use of technology changes. Maybe we can become more efficient in the way we communicate and reach a broader audience. Maybe we can make a change and create innovation within our space that we hadn't even thought of before. So I think sometimes when we have an upset like the pandemic that we've all been dealing with this year, sometimes there's good that comes out of it. And I think the not-for-profit sector is ripe for that change. I've heard many stories from many individuals in this space talking about how their events that they either couldn't hold this year or that they held in a virtual format that maybe only yielded 40% of the revenue that they had received before, which then impacted their ability to help with the cause that they're supporting. Those kind of numbers are devastating to hear, and we have to find a way to adopt. What we're going to talk about today is a variety of different topics. One of them being the digital transformation and strategy around how we evolve to be able to capture and really innovate in this industry to be better and bigger and stronger than we ever have been. And I believe we can do it together. There's some things to think about in the way that we look at the future of the not-for-profit sector. Maybe there's ways to collaborate. Maybe there's ways to share services. that allow us to be bigger and better, stronger together. Maybe there's ways to reach out in ways we had never thought of before, or provide support in ways we've never thought of before. So I want you to think about that as you listen to the different presenters today. We're going to even consider that maybe we can actually have cost savings in way of doing things differently. So I would like to talk today about Bruce McDonald and from Imagine Canada. He's going to be here today, as well as some of the BDO professionals to talk to you on digital strategy, governance, financial literacy for your boards. And of course, we have to talk about fraud. We don't like to think that that could ever happen to us, but if we don't pay attention to it, then that's when it will. We need to be sure that we're securing our systems, especially now that we're working in a much more virtual world. But today, our experts are going to help you navigate some of that information. I'm also pleased to let you know that for our Francophone attendees, we do have 2 breakout sessions that we will be delivering in French. So please make sure you sign up for those breakout sessions as you come along through the conference. We're super excited to share all this information with you today, and I thank you all for giving us your time today. We've had a tremendous outpouring of excitement around this conference, and a great number of registrants that we're happy to see and connect with every day. So enjoy the conference today. I hope that you get some valuable information from this, and with that, I would like to introduce you to our keynote speaker, Bruce McDonald. Bruce is the president and CEO of Imagine Canada, an organization I'm sure most of you, if not all of you, have all heard about. The organization focuses on strengthening Canadian charities and not-for-profits so they can better serve individuals, communities, and not only here, but around the world. Bruce himself has worked with young individuals, he's worked with older adults and persons with disabilities. And Bruce has also been appointed co-chair of the Permanent Advisory Committee on the charitable sector, working with the federal government since 2009. We are very excited and very thankful to have Bruce here today with us. And with that, Bruce, I'd like to pass the stage over to you.
Thanks so much, Kelly. And I'm going to go through what for me is the most nerve-wracking part, which is sharing my screen and making sure that I get the presentation. Here we are. Okay, so hopefully, and if one of the tech folks can just let me know, maybe just audio-wise, that you can see the screen, then I'll plunge on.
Yes, we can see your screen.
Terrific.
Thank you, Bruce.
Great. Thanks very much, and thank you so much to BDO for the opportunity to be here today. So with that, I'm going to start with Joey the Otter. And as you think about the not-for-profit of tomorrow, you're probably wondering why we're starting with Joey the Otter. Well, the story of Joey the Otter is that this was about an approximately 2-week-old sea otter who was found on Vancouver Island next to what they believe to be the body of his mother, and was rescued and flown to Vancouver's Marine Mammal Rescue Center, which is run by Oceanwise, the same organization that runs the Vancouver Aquarium. And as they were looking to ensure that Joey was going to be healthy and happy, they also decided to try something new. And that was they created a YouTube live stream dedicated solely to Joey. So you could tune in at any time and watch Joey eat, sleep, play, be looked after by the handlers. I'm sure some of you have seen this story in the most recent issue of Maclean's magazine. So that's towards the end of July into August. In the fall, they upgraded the technology to a new higher resolution feed in October. And in the first 3 months, Joey had garnered over 6 million views. Highlight clips that were created were added to the center's YouTube channel, and it had hundreds of thousands of views. And Joey's online presence became a catalyst for experiences for people with both the center and the aquarium where he was transferred, and also became a new source of donors. And this was key. The Vancouver Aquarium, like many organizations that relies on ticket sales, had really been experiencing challenges since the pandemic. Ticket revenues were down by 80% because of closures. Plus, they'd also lost cafe and gift shop revenues. And of course, it's critical because it costs about $1 million a month to feed and keep 70,000 animals alive and healthy. And so the center and the aquarium went a bit further as well. So not only did they invite people to tune in and see how Joey was doing, but they also mobilized a team of volunteers who would engage with people as they came and actually would invite them to support Joey at a tune of about $35. They'd also answer any questions as Joey was rehabbing, and then eventually put into the rest of the Sea Otter community. And it's interesting, in the McLean story, it notes that this had raised $200,000. I had a chance to talk to the folks at Oceanalize this week, and that's now in excess of $300,000 that Joey's presence and the connection to people have done. So this is kind of a story of today, but embodies a number of characteristics that I think are crucial for the not-for-profit of tomorrow. A willingness to adapt and innovate, and quickly. Using technology, finding new audience. Really, the appeal was universal. I kind of like this quote. It's one that we've been using at Imagine Canada. Learning and innovation go hand in hand. The arrogance of success is to think that what you did yesterday will be sufficient for tomorrow. And so as we think about the not-for-profit of tomorrow, I'm inviting you today to consider the following as kind of a framework for the future. And there's lots of different things the not-for-profit of tomorrow will need to have. But as we've been talking with organizations as they go through the pandemic and thinking about what the future holds, these are 5 that really stand out for me. Adaptability and innovation, having digital in our DNA, continually demonstrating organizational excellence, our changing society and authentically engaging with that, and having a focus on people and talent. So I'm going to start with adaptability and innovation. McKinsey in June put out a study that looked and talked with corporate leaders about innovating in a crisis. And it was interesting because that although executives believe that innovating the business will be critical, and you can see 90% believe that COVID will fundamentally change the way they do business over the next 5 years, 85% are concerned that the crisis will have a lasting impact on their customer needs and wants over the next 5 years. So even those numbers, they believe it's critical, few feel equipped to face the challenge. Only 21% said they have the expertise, resources, and commitment to pursue new growth opportunities. And 2/3 believe this will be the most challenging moment of their executive career. And that's the private sector, the ones with resources. From that same study, I thought there was some really interesting language. And I invite you to replace the word customers with donors or channels with programs. So many businesses simply can't operate as they have in the past. What made a company successful historically may no longer be possible during or after the crisis. Donors may struggle to contribute. Programs may have radically shifted to accommodate new needs or work around new constraints. A stable regulatory context may have changed, potentially creating opportunities that never existed before. The assumptions that supported years of stable, predictable growth may no longer be valid. And I think we in the charitable and nonprofit sector are witnessing that with the impact to event-based revenue, to door-to-door canvassing, to engagement with major gift donors, to the way we deliver our programs and engage with volunteers. The way we've done business in the past is unlikely to be the way we'll do business in the future. McKinsey's also kind of got a great model for testing innovation and asking yourselves the questions: do you really innovate? Are you adaptable? And they've got these sort of 8 points around aspiring, choosing, discovering. And again, while the language is for the business community, I think there's some ways that this can be adapted for our own sector. So it's less about beating the competition, but actually ensuring that you develop and launch new programs quickly and effectively. And I think the good news for our sector is that we're doing that. Even at the beginning of the pandemic, from some work that we did at Imagine Canada, we're seeing that 54% of charities have transitioned in-person programs online, and again, 42% had developed completely new programs in response. And so the sector was moving as quickly as it absolutely could. And a great example, I think, of sort of innovative thinking and adaptation during this time comes to us from Oakville, Ontario. And I'd sort of caught in wind of the Oakville Community Foundation, who had recognized that many of the charities that they support had been supported by the small business community for a long time, and that the small business community was really feeling the economic impact and fallout of COVID-19, decided to do something different. And what they did was they created something called the Charity Small Business Partnership. And charities were eligible to apply for funding that would provide up to $5,000 for meals or $10,000 for other goods and services, provided that they use those funds to engage the small business community. You know, one of the organizations that benefited from this was Art House. This is a wonderful organization in the Halton region that offers art programming, recognizing that close to 15,000 young people don't have access, little or no access to extracurricular arts programs. They'd already started to adapt and evolve during the pandemic, and were actually helping by working with restaurants to provide weekly dinners, about 2,700 meals in the first 8 months. And like many, it had benefited from the support of small business. Two companies in particular have been great supporters. The Medicine Shop Pharmacy had been providing an annual sponsorship of up to $1,000, and Barclay Design, Print and Copy had been discounting their printing up to 50%. So as a result, though, of this innovative funding approach, these companies have now each received about, or in the coming months as well, will receive up to $4,000 worth of business from Art House. Barclay's going beyond their traditional work of printing and going to their art suppliers. And so recognizing that Art House's programs have gone from a live in-person program to online, now impoverished kids in the Milton area are receiving art supplies on Thursdays so that they can do their programs online. Barclays has gone to their wholesalers, and they actually are finding supplies that they didn't originally have by talking to their wholesale network, providing discounts and enabling these supplies to make it out. But as well, the small business now is receiving funds from the charity to purchase their supplies. And thanks to Medicine Shop, this year, Art House is going to be delivering a health hamper valued at about $80 that'll go to between 20 and 50 families in the community that really could benefit from things like baby formula, deodorant, razors, teen body wash, or teen kits, toothpaste and brushes, those kinds of things. And again, Medicine Shop has gone to its supplier network to be able to make the dollars go further and have whole or discounted prices for purchasing supplies, to make them have the ability to provide supplies to even more families. And so I think this is a great example of really innovative thinking, adapting both as a charity that's a service delivery organization and as a funder, and saying in this time we're going to do business differently. The second one is what I call digital in our DNA. I wanted to mention this story that I had come across from the Ottawa Rape Crisis Center a couple of weeks ago. And this is an organization that has announced that it is closing, hopefully temporarily. But that I was intrigued that in the messaging in the Ottawa Citizen, that board directors wrote that the center had tried to offer virtual services during the pandemic, but it was able to do so because of outdated IT infrastructure, which requires a significant overhaul. And you think about a very personal, very emotional program, very human program that's being delivered. The challenge of doing that online can be quite something. And even a day later, another statement from the board around shifting from in-person to online counseling requires more than just laptop, cell phones, and making sure that they have internet connections. There has to be privacy, confidentiality, safeguards. And it's interesting for me because I think this also speaks to a flaw in our funding systems, where funders of all stripes have hesitated to provide cost of administration dollars. And what we're witnessing right now during this pandemic is the need for things like digital infrastructure and architecture, talent that knows how to make these adaptations to an online environment. And in some cases, like the case of the Ottawa Rape Crisis Center, they don't exist. And hopefully they'll be back stronger than ever. But it's interesting, Salesforce just recently came out with a report about nonprofit organizations and this idea of digital maturity. And they define it as an organization's ability to leverage data to inform decision making, reach new audiences, personalize communications, and forecast fundraising. And three sort of highlights out of this report. One was that they found that there's a strong correlation between organizations with high digital maturity, being able to do all those things, and those with the most innovative and confident responses to the pandemic. They saw this as an indicator of how well organizations handled the crisis, how they adapted, even winning grant increases or avoiding declines in a year filled with uncertainty. The key takeaway from the report, unsurprisingly, in an increasingly digital world, it's more important than ever for nonprofits to have the modern digital tools necessary to be efficient, effective, and successful. The second key takeaway around exceeding goals, high digital maturity nonprofits reported they were exceeding their goals at higher rates over the last 6 months. So there's a clear correlation between the level of digital maturity and performance in four key areas, which I think you'll all recognize: program delivery, marketing and communications, overall mission, and fundraising revenue. Nonprofits, the ones that were high digital maturity, they fared between 3 and 9% better than medium digital maturity organizations, and between 9 and 25% better than those considered low digital maturity. And I think you would agree that some of those key factors or metrics around program and fundraising are essentials. They were also more confident about the future and had fewer fears about what lies ahead. And that makes sense, as we're going to be in a digital world permanently, and for a while exclusively. You can see that those who have entered this space with a higher digital maturity are probably feeling a bit better. They were better able to understand their environment, have fewer fears, and more confidence in the future. And it even was helpful in strengthening relationships with supporters and constituents. In fact, those with high digital maturity were 1.4 times more likely to be confident that they'd be better able to engage with more audiences through digital channels. And you can see the percentage point difference. And it's interesting when you think about digital maturity. There's a kind of an interesting story out of Australia with a program called Digivolve. And this is actually something done in conjunction with the Australian Museum in Sydney. And it's a citizen scientist program. And it encourages ordinary, everyday Australians to kind of see the collection and help record and catalog. And they've been doing this in conjunction with the museum and the Atlas of Living Australia. The website and this tool actually launched back in 2011. And there's been about 4.4 million individual items in the catalog. But what's been really interesting for the folks at the museum, the Australian Museum, has been the spike in activity since the pandemic started. What they said is, of the millions of digital records that have been created, about half have been generated since the lockdown in March. And it makes sense. People are sitting at home, they have things to do, or rather they don't have things to do, and they're looking for things to do. And if they are interested in this area, it's a very easy way to engage with, really in a fun way and in an area of their own interest. What's been interesting too is that they've gone from having about 100 regular volunteers to a peak in June of over 7,500 volunteers who are engaged in this. Now, they have the benefit of having this infrastructure in place when the pandemic started. But I think to the point around digital maturity, the organizations that have been investing in this, have been working with partners, have had the staff and the digital infrastructure and architecture, have been able to, in a sense, scale quickly. And in this case, it's bringing literally millions of new records and thousands of new people to their doors. I think the story is not yet to be finished, in the sense that it'll be interesting to see how they engage with those volunteers going forward and whether they're able to convert any of those into being donors. Organizational excellence is another, I think, characteristic. And it's interesting from some work that Imagine Canada participated with some other organizations. We commissioned a poll, an Angus Reid Institute poll in September, and found that, since the We Charity controversy started, 57% of respondents said it raised questions for them about governance, transparency, and management that are relevant for the whole charitable sector. We were very interested to know, was the ripple effect confined to one organization and perhaps the federal government, or was it wider? Clearly, from these two data points, you can see that it's wider. I was also interested to understand what's happening globally. And in the UK, it's interesting. Significant elevations in trust levels are not being mirrored in the charitable sector. So in a poll that was done in both May and then again in August, Britons were giving huge points to their national health system, to even supermarkets. But as you can see, charitable trust numbers had remained fairly flat. And in fact, out of that same study, it was interesting that they were saying that perhaps it's because the public hasn't been that impressed with the work of charities in the pandemic. About half are. But I think it also tells us that we have a story to tell, and that perhaps, at least in the Canadian context, our foundation of trust has been, we've seen a tremor, a bit of a shockwave to that, and we have to be mindful of it. This is from a report in 2015, but I actually think it's quite true today in terms of governance is essential to the success of both organizational excellence and management systems. And I think it's this blend of ensuring that not only do we have the systems to execute, prioritize, track activities and programs, but we're also governed in a way that is open, accountable, and transparent. And I mentioned this one in the sense that Imagine Canada and our accreditation program was actually not interviewed as part of the story, but the Toronto Star editorial board wrote a story about hoping that Canadians wouldn't punish the entire sector because of one story that had been going on throughout the summer. But it's interesting at the same time that that leading newspaper, the largest daily in the country, was acknowledging the importance of transparency and accountability. And I think at a time when donors, volunteers, and the community are expecting it, that the not-for-profit of tomorrow, at the very minimum, and we should already be doing this, but at the very minimum, be posting financial statements, posting who's on your board, and showcasing impact. Both stories and studies, both are valuable. This is the only part that's, quite frankly, a shameless sales pitch. And we're inviting you to also take a look at ensuring that you have that seal of approval and the Imagine Canada Standards Program, which has been invented by the sector. We're the stewards of the program, but it's a great way to demonstrate the highest levels of good governance, transparency, and accountability. And I think at a time when we are seeing maybe a slight softening of trust levels, being able to ensure that your donors, your service participants, your volunteers have confidence in your organization, that's critical. Another element, I think, for not-for-profit of tomorrow is around our changing society. And Canada is changing. Like 1 in 5 Canadians are immigrants. It's projected to grow to 1 in 3 by 2036. Over 300,000+ newcomers are arriving in Canada yearly. We're going to have over 1 million in the next 3 years. And I know this is a pre-pandemic number, but we had about 500,000 international students coming to Canada, and over 60% would stay after graduation. Our nation is changing, and we as a sector need to change as well. The good news is that newcomers to Canada, as seen in a poll that we, along with a number of other charitable partners, put out in September, we're seeing a real influx of generation coming with newcomers to Canada. Just under 3/4 of newcomers in second generation reported donating to charitable causes. Their average gift was $857, which is very high and correlates to native-born Canadians. We're heading into the holiday season, one of the most important for charities and nonprofits. 40% of all individual giving comes in the last 8 weeks of the year. But what we're also finding is that there's other observances that have generosity embedded in those observances. And so, yes, Christmas is important, but Ramadan, Diwali, others, if your community has people who celebrate those faiths, there are opportunities for organizations to authentically engage and transform your organizations. And we really think that this is an enormous potential. Just some basic multiplier effects applied. We think that based on the surveys that we were sampling, that this could result in about $1.7 billion in new giving to our sector. But reflecting our society is not just about newcomers to Canada. It's also the seismic shift that we're witnessing on things like racial justice, propelled by Black Lives Matter and an examination of practices around systemic racism. I think this is one of the most hopeful numbers I've seen in a while. And it's a US number. The first 6 months of 2020 had US corporate funders pledging nearly 18 times more funding to issues around racial equity than in the previous decade combined. And I think it'll be an interesting examination in Canada to see what funders of all stripes continue to do here as we see this moving to the forefront. In addition, traditionally, from a corporate perspective, a lot of those dollars go to larger organizations where many of those in Black, Indigenous, persons of color organizations are smaller. Sometimes they're not for profits as opposed to charities. And yet I think that for organizations, we really need to be changing. I had a chance to speak to Ken Mayhew, who's the president and CEO of the William Osler Health System Foundation. I just love this quote. We need to be of the community, not representative of the community. And the William Osler Health System in group of hospitals is located in Brampton, Ontario. It's a city that has grown enormously, and in fact is kind of it's doubled in size over the last number of years. It's a mosaic, a true community of community. 52% of Brampton's population report that they were born outside of Canada. 44% self-identify as being South Asian. This is a community that is changing rapidly. And what the William Osler Health System has done is really embed this kind of change into its DNA. It's recognized that the traditional Judeo-Christian view of philanthropy needs to be adapted for a community that's changing. The motivations for giving can be different. Recognition can be different. And what they've been talking about is in the engagement of people, there's never an attempt to convert them to a particular way of giving, no false intentions, but rather to understand what forms of engagement and participation are authentic and work for them. Their board has evolved to ensure that there's strong inclusion from people of the communities. They've actually brought prominent members of the community into collectives to galvanize giving to the hospitals. There's 6 different groups engaging: Indo-Canadian Friends of Osler, the Amigos of Portuguese, the Peel Memorial, etc. There's a whole pile of them. But I was really struck with a comment that Ken made to me, which was, and Ken is kind of like me, sort of middle-aged Caucasian male. And what he was saying to me was that the future of philanthropy has never been brighter, but it doesn't look like me. And I think for the not-for-profit of tomorrow, we need to embrace the changes that Canada is going through and say, this is a real wonderful opportunity for our communities. The last area that I just want to talk about is people and talent. And it's one that, we're the sector of people. We look after people, but do we look after ourselves? So the following data is actually coming from a yet-to-be-released report. Imagine Canada had gone into the field in April with what we call a sector monitor survey, had over 1,000 Canadian leaders of charities provide responses. We're in the field right now. So this is kind of a sneak peek at the information. These are not final numbers, and the final data will be coming out in just over a week. But I wanted to give you a sense as to what some of the findings were as it relates to the stress that our sector is going through. So we've obviously been a sector that's seen a lot of layoffs. But the good news, if there is some, is that peaked in the spring, and primarily through things like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy Program, people have been called back into the sector. So you can kind of see that decline in early 2020 of average around 44% is now more like 18%. We still have some work to do on the numbers, but so we're still down a lot. 18% when you're talking about organizational capacity is huge. About a third of charities are reporting slower staff numbers than prior to the pandemic, and roughly a quarter are reporting decreases in working hours. So at a time when demand for services continues to rise, and one of the other findings is even since the spring, the demand for services has increased more. We are working with fewer people to be able to provide those important services. Another sort of warning sign or indicator for us is that the proportion of work on immediate challenges versus kind of building or maintaining organizational capacity is quite heavy. it has increased either somewhat or significantly, kind of a combined almost 70%, which means organizations are still very much in the emergency phase of the pandemic, but it's causing stress. As we think about the ability of organizations to maintain work-life balance and avoid burnout for its staff, 47% have indicated that their ability to maintain appropriate balance has decreased. And I certainly anecdotally have heard that that's the case in talking with sector leaders, many of whom said, I took a week off in the summer and I spent 3 days of that working. And so this is not just for the not-for-profit of tomorrow, but it's the not-for-profit and charity of today, that we need to look after those in our sector. I think what comes along with this sort of awkward equation of increased demand and either flat or decreasing supply of resources is stress on people, stress on talent, and we as leaders need to make choices, whether we start things, whether we stop them, whether we're continuing, with a key focus on that stop. I actually believe that the not-for-profit of tomorrow is going to develop more competencies around looking after its people better, because we will be working differently. We will be working more in a digital way. I do expect the pendulum will swing back to in-person stuff, absolutely. But it may not be for a while that our capacity and our ability to meet demand for service rises. So I think those of us who are working in the sector, my invitation to you is to think about the toll that the pandemic is taking on your people, to think about what the future looks like for how your organization will deliver services, raise money, manage its volunteers, engage with its boards, and think about what can be deferred, what can be put on hold, what's not essential. Focus on those key things so that those staff and those busy volunteers are able to stay with you in the long term. So just a couple of closing thoughts then around the not-for-profit of tomorrow. So one is maybe a glimmer of hope. And I don't know if this is a representative study, but Deloitte's Holiday Retail Outlook in 2020, I thought had an interesting stat in there. Consumer confidence is lower, but Canadians are feeling more charitable. More than half expect Canada's economy to weaken in 2021. 31% of consumers expect to be worse off. But it's inspiring consumers to help their fellow Canadians by increasing their charitable donations by an average of 86%. That's a huge number. And we're hoping that that's reflected in the holiday season, absolutely. And the last sort of story I just want to share with you is, I think, a wonderful example of how, when we think about the future, that there's different ways of working. It comes again from that granting stream that the Oakville Community Foundation started. And it's with to me, it illustrates how a not-for-profit of tomorrow may look. This is an organization with no staff. It's 100% volunteer run. It's the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton. Its mission has primarily been in promoting unity and diversity, unbiased inclusion, and this has been achieved through cultural programming. When the pandemic started, they were doing music lessons, but realized quickly they weren't going to be able to do a spring concert. Maybe the lessons could continue online. And they'd been working with a documentary filmmaker and had created a documentary film called Legacy Voices. And once they had done that, they'd also then connected with Sheridan College in Oakville about the idea of recording a concert. So they had the filmmaker get engaged and record the music, and then they were able to distribute these digital concerts to their members, which was hugely popular. Then took the idea to another level and said, well, what about kind of a date night idea? People can't really go out, they're not supposed to, so that we'll send out food, invite people to stay home and watch the music and the film and stay safe. So they were working with performers that were drastically hurt because their fees were down. The filmmaker was not having a lot of success in terms of looking to have new projects to be able to do. They were kind of idle and financially hurting. So they could support them all with one idea: getting restaurants engaged who were hard hit, supporting musicians, supporting studios and filmmakers. And they started talking with restaurants in the Halton area. And one in particular, Caribbean Vibes in Milton, stepped up. And they found this amazing chef who really wanted to help. So the Canadian Caribbean Association of Halton mobilized volunteers to deliver food. And they did porch drop-offs to seniors. They then brought in another partner, Halton Food for Life, a food rescue organization. And what they were able to do were get ingredients to the chef at a deeply discounted price. So then, through the grant of the Oakville Community Foundation, CCAH was able to purchase the food. The chef and our restaurant were able to retain the profits, to stay in business, and the charity got the food at a deeply discounted rate. What they found was that these porch drop-offs and the quick touch base with the seniors served as a call, as a lifeline and a wellness check. They changed the program to be able to deliver multiple food meals at the same time. And they created an awareness program with students at Sheridan College. They had a budget for 400 meals, ended up delivering over 2,000 meals to people in their community. And they're continuing now with a second round. Caribbean Vibes wanted to keep giving back to the community. And with private donations, they've now created a community fridge at the restaurant. Halton Food for Life is going to continue to stock it. The chef has leveraged other contacts, and there's going to be a meal for people who need it at the restaurant, the No One Goes Hungry program. So for me, this story illustrates a number of qualities of the not-for-profit of tomorrow. The group's adapted and innovated. It's used digital technology to deliver some of its programs. It's open to all people. You don't have to be from the Caribbean community to participate in this. It's a wonderful expression of the changing nature of our communities. It's found ways to creatively engage both talent, and in this case, talents. And it's demonstrating how a small volunteer-based organization is operating at a high level. So with that, I'm just going to say thanks very much and see, I don't know if there's any comments or questions that have come in, but thank you so much for the invitation to be part of this today.
Thank you so much, Bruce. What an amazing presentation. If I could say, you've touched on so many important points in the not-for-profit sector that we're all feeling right now. And what I absolutely loved is the relevance of the examples that you shared. It's easy for us sometimes to think of the large global charities or large not-for-profits as dealing with this better or with more funds. But the reality is there's a lot of innovation in the smaller charities, and the way that they're thinking, and they're bringing groups together to work together to benefit not only the recipients or the community, but also to promote different organizations that are also struggling, like artists or musicians. So great stories. We do have one question from the audience, and without asking the question first, I'd like to state that they also mentioned what a terrific presentation that was. Very relevant for everyone. But they are asking about in what ways are the government supporting the NPO sector, and what additional support is required and being advocated for.
Sure. Great question. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've been advocating for what we call a three-legged stool. The first leg of the stool was to be included in the major governmental programs that the federal government would announce for Canadians, things like the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, rent subsidy, business support programs. We were really delighted to be included in that. I think it's important to note how monumental that was. Back in 08-09, when there was a stimulus package after the Great Recession then, charities and nonprofits weren't included in that. So this is actually a big step forward. So right now, we estimate, based on the last numbers that we've seen, that charities have received about $1.4 billion through the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy. The second leg of the stool was what we called a grant program. So if you look at that example from the Ottawa Rape Crisis Center, digital infrastructure and talent to run it is not necessarily part of, a kind of wage subsidy program. Maybe the talent, but certainly not the digital architecture. So we've been advocating for a grant program that would help organizations with other costs that they would need. And the third leg of the stool, and sorry, we have not been successful in getting that yet. The third leg of the stool is donor incentives. Is there a way to invite Canadians to participate, either through a donor matching program? There's actually a private members bill right now to change tax credits around capital gains treatment for the donation of private shares in real estate. So we're continuing to work for more financial supports. The federal government has already done some targeted supports. Right now, we estimate in total, it's been just over $2 billion of support for the sector. But we're every day pounding the doors down in the virtual Ottawa saying there's more yet to do.
Awesome. It's so great to have an organization like yours that is an advocate for this sector. Bruce, I can't thank you enough. It was a wonderful presentation, very relevant, certainly touched on a lot of the topics that we all believe are important for the not-for-profit of tomorrow. So thank you very much, and we look forward to connecting again with you soon.
Thanks
For
so much. Good luck with the rest of the conference.
Thank you, Bruce. And
Bye-bye.
for the audience, we are going to take a 5-minute break here, coming back at 11:50. Please make sure that you're checking out the virtual networking area of the platform if you want to connect with any of your peers, or if any of the BDO representatives are there, you can also reach out to them. So we'll be back online in about 5 minutes. Thank you.